back. Today, I'm welcoming back Sean Mendelson and welcoming for the first time Sean's brother, Jason Mendelson. So, Sean and Jason are sons of Lee Mendelson, who produced something like 60 Peanuts TV specials over the course of his career. And these days, Sean and Jason are carrying the torch with Lee Mendelson Film Productions, which lately has included producing releases of some of the Vince Guaraldi soundtracks to those Peanuts specials. So why they're here with me today is to discuss the upcoming release of the complete soundtrack of the 1969 animated special, It Was a Short Summer, Charlie Brown, which is being put out on 45 RPM for Record Store Day. And it also happens to be the 55th anniversary of the special. So maybe by way of introduction, I know, Sean, you were a latecomer to the business in terms of working with your father, but Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been involved almost for your entire life, starting out, I think, with maybe some voice acting.
Very early on, nepotism took its root in my success because my father asked me when I was about 4. They were doing a show called The Charlie Brown and Snoopy Show, which was an entire Saturday morning cartoon series based on the strips. And he asked me to do some voice work because they needed a little brother for Linus and Lucy, whose name was Rerun. And so I thought for most of my life I originated the character. I did not. Another gentleman played him in 1976, and it's Arbor Day Charlie Brown. But I think I was the second one to do it. I did it during the series. And that led to many other voice acting gigs for my father. I also did, my first record was for Disney, for Mercer Mayer, for Little Critter. I voiced those as well. But then after my crowning achievement was Peppermint Patty, and then puberty retired me from playing girls and animals, and I was no longer behind the microphone. But I did enjoy that. And Sean, you could tell them your great experiences as well.
I think I might have mentioned this in our last interview, but I just threw up over the Mayflower in 1989. There was the second Thanksgiving episode called part of a historical group of 8, like a mini series, if you will, my dad helped produce. And it was what was the name of the show? Jason,
It was the first ever animated miniseries for network television called This Is America, Charlie Brown. And Sean was a pilgrim on the Mayflower Voyagers. Right. It was called This Is America, Charlie Brown, the Mayflower Voyagers.
And so when my dad felt bad for me after all the work Jason got, he said, well, yours is in the Smithsonian with Jason on that particular one. So that's my claim to fame. And then I got retired right after I vomit over the edge of the ship, or at least figuratively do so.
I'll point out our older brother and sister, Glenn was Schroeder in The Great Pumpkin, and our sister Linda also did voices throughout the 60s and 70s, including on one of the feature films. So it was a tradition we carried on amongst the siblings.
So what about today? So you guys are both co-producers, right? I understand, of a few of these albums. Is that the best way to define your roles?
Yeah. So Jason was starting to look for this stuff right before our dad's passing in 2019. And then we were able to have a lot of extra time in 2020 during COVID, and Jason was able to find it at the warehouses of Bill Melendez, which is the animator studio, and that being the tapes, the original tapes that support all these soundtracks. And we started with It's a Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, where we co-produced that with Mark Pirro at Concord Records, and then Jason can take it from there.
What had happened was we were trying to find better sources for the Guaraldi music that we exhibit and control. And we'd always had the Show Masters, which is the mixed edited version that we used on the television specials. But we didn't like we thought there had to be something better than that. And so in part, I think I put it in the liner notes, one of the great things, the only good thing for us about the pandemic was we couldn't do anything. And so it gave us some time to go look for some things we hadn't been able to find before. And as I said, as Sean just said, we went through the storage, and at first we didn't find it. And our Vincent Hudson, who does the mastering on this album, he had helped us make better versions of some of the songs from those Show Masters, but it still wasn't quite right. And so one day we found a 1/4-inch tape, and it was for You're in Love, Charlie Brown. We couldn't find anything for Great Pumpkin. We were trying to do Great Pumpkin first. And Sean, you want me to share the story? I'll share. I guess I got it first. Well, I'll tell you. So we turned it over to Deluxe. Said, can you can you get this digitized for us? Can we hear what's on this tape? And we had no idea what it was. This is after looking for this decades ago, and even for 7-8 months before we found this. And all of a sudden I wait a week and a half, 2 weeks, and I get the log, and the log is 90 minutes. And so I know something is wrong because the show masters are all 25 minutes. So when it's 90 minutes, I go, oh, maybe it's 3 times the show. It's a dub. It's a copy. But when I got the log, it didn't make sense. There were multiple it said take 1, take 2, take 3. I go, oh no, what is this? This is not what I'm looking for. But maybe I didn't want to hope that it would be what it was. And an hour or two later, while I just sat staring at my screen waiting for the digital files, I got the music, and it was everything. It was Vince and Bill Melendez and the players talking and all of the actual original recording sessions from that show. And then I said, oh, now this is something else. Now we have something interesting. And so we started on a quest to find all of that music everywhere. But it started with that one and led to all these other ones. So Sean, and I immediately was on the phone with Sean, and Sean's response was,
I lost all the blood in my face because it felt like finding treasure. And it was better than I was kind of hoping we'd find this. Jason was hoping we'd find it. But what it was is it was all that stuff behind the curtain. I keep using that term. I think I used that last time I spoke with you, Chris, but we got to see how these things were made in the studio. You hear the banter, you hear the count-ins, you hear discussion points. And so that was very exciting. And I'm very, I know Jason and I are both excited about that one seeing the light of day in the next few years.
Well, yeah. So Sean, I guess why, tell me more about the choice, I guess, of this one to be released now.
Well, this was actually initially the one that Jason and I started cobbling together last January of 2023. And we almost got to the end point, and then we realized, we can get, and we put all our efforts in. We rushed to get the 50th anniversary of Charlie Brown Thanksgiving, which we talked about last year, released in October of 2023. And so it got put on the back burner, but it was so close to being ready. That's why it was the next one out. And so 55 years, it doesn't have as great a ring maybe as 50th, but it felt like the right time. It was nice to go from a stereo mix of Thanksgiving 1973 to presenting like All Up Great Pumpkin, a mono mix of It Was a Short Summer. And then what Jason and I also discovered, because every one of these shows has a distinctive sound, a distinctive like aura to it, is that it's shorter. It's shorter than most of the other shows. And as a result, Jason and I, who aren't, to be honest with you, the biggest vinyl enthusiasts, but we have become the most enthusiastic about it as time's gone by, is that we could make it into a 45. And I discovered, again, through my children, who are more the vinyl enthusiasts in my household than I am, that when you put a 45 on and you put the needle on it, it's impressive how much more clean the sound is. And we had a great manufacturer doing this. And so it really shows. And Jason and I both are really happy with how pristine the sound is. And what's distinctive about this show, the two most important things to me are that in 1969, the Beatles were about to close up shop. Rock was taking over for jazz. This was, as far as Peanuts, the 15 Peanuts scores, not only is this the swingiest one, Jason and I call it the swingiest because of the meter, it has this Woody Herman vibe. And what I mean by that is, I'd say more than half the guys on this album, and it's like 9-10 guys performing on it, all went through the Woody Herman experience in the 50s and the 60s. And this push of big band jazz is the biggest sound that Guaraldi, I think even I would say outside of Peanuts, put out. And no one's ever heard this. These have never been released, these tracks. And so he wrapped up the 60s, if you will, in the first 6 of the 15 shows he scored, with this big band, full jazz, fully non-electric keyboard version. The reason I say that is because the next show and every show subsequent employs electric keyboards, overdubbing, and all kinds of experimental stuff.
Yeah, so let's talk about that lineup actually, because it occurred to me when I was looking at the lineup, I thought, these guys have played together. And I started going through my shelves, and I realized that they played in the mid 50s for a label. And I'm going to show, not one of yours, but sorry, I don't know if that's visible, Conti Candoli Quartet.
Yep.
So
we were just talking about him before we came on with you.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. So trumpet player, he led this album. Guaraldi's on it, Monty Budwig, and then Stan Levy on drums. But Frank Rossellino was on Mode and recorded with a lot of these guys as well. Everyone but Herman basically also put out a few albums. They call themselves the Hermanites, and we're putting out stuff for Mode in the mid 50s. And I realized that's why it feels like these guys played together. And I sort of arrived at that conclusion. So let's talk about this lineup, because it's a bigger lineup. You said 9 or 10 guys, and I think at various points they may be, I don't know if they're doing octet or nonette kind of formats on some of these,
Yes.
but who all's on this album?
Well, you got both the Candolis. You got Conti and Pete Candoli, as you said, Frank Rosalino. These guys played on multiple episodes, multiple Peanut specials. Herb Ellis, and Herb Ellis is fascinating to me because the follow up to this particular show, as I mentioned, we go electronic. In 1971, they brought jazz players together for Play It Again, Charlie Brown, and Herb Ellis, who's a straight jazz player, had to play 2-chord rock and roll as Charlie Brown does his sort of garage band in 1971. So times were changing, and Guaraldi was changing with it. Well, furthermore, we got Peter Crystaleve. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I'm sorry to Peter. William Hood, both on woodwinds, Jack Sperling on drums, and then Monty Budwig on double bass. And then the addition here, the thing that stands out, which kind of harkens back to the 50s when Guaraldi was playing with Cal Tjader, is the gentleman on vibraphone, Victor Feldman. And that adds this, even though it's just a subtle instrument, it adds this whole other level of sheen, and it gets that big band feel even bigger. And so it's the first time you hear that on a Peanut special, additional percussion to drums in that respect. And it all's tied together. I would say I give a lot of credit to John Scott Trotter, who at the same time was working on a Boy Named Charlie Brown movie around all in 1969. It came out, I think, December. Jason can correct me if I'm wrong, 1969. And it's just very pristine, clean sound, clean edges, and beautifully, beautifully done with these guys.
Yeah, the word that came to mind when I was listening to it, sort of previewing it, was cinematic. It just sounded a lot, like you said, it was tighter, and I'm sure that was John Scott Trotter's doing, I suppose. But it's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned, Victor Feldman. He has such a light sort of tone on Air Music, on Peppermint Patty, and others, I think, where he's featured a little bit more. And it's just really nice because when you have a dense horn chorus that is kind of providing this low level backing, then you have this this very delicate sort of, I don't want to say delicate, that's not right. Because there's a lot of resonance to it.
Meticulous. Precise. That's what I would call it. Everything seems very, very clean, very clean.
Can I add something to that too? Because you just brought up the word cinematic, and it's in the liner notes that Derek Bang talks about a little bit too. But 1969 was the most, in my opinion, prolific Peanuts year. It was the 5th year of Charlie Brown Christmas had been on the air. It had become a tradition by that point. The stage show You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown had premiered. The movie A Boy Named Charlie Brown was created. It was the first feature film that Mendelson Melendez did, and Vince Guaraldi provided the sound score along with Rod McEwen, who was a poet who did the songs with the team for this movie. And as you both mentioned this, so I'm going to say, because I can't resist, that movie, A Boy Named Charlie Brown, was nominated for an Oscar for Best Sound Score. It's a category that doesn't exist anymore. And it would have won, but their competition was a smaller group called the Beatles that had released Let It Be, and that won the Oscar against them. And so the Peanuts crew got to hang out with the Beatles in the sort of pre-Oscar pageantry. The Beatles weren't at the Oscars to win their award, to receive their award, but they'd been together at various times. And the Beatles would say, we can't beat Peanuts and Vince Guaraldi in America. And my father would say things like, you're the Beatles. And they'd just recently broken up, but it was still sort of a thing. So not only when you talk about cinematic, these same guys were playing on the soundtrack for the movie. And I'll give you the quick, I'm sorry, Sean, I'll give you the quick backstory on this show. They were so busy. My father had 3 or 4 different TV projects going. They had the feature film for the first time going. And this was going to be the special for 1969, but they did not finish it. They couldn't get it done. It was called It Is a Short Summer, Charlie Brown. And the show they'd written wasn't going to come out for its CBS premiere. So as they delayed it, they came up with an alternative, which was, it was a short summer, Charlie Brown, and they added 4 minutes of animation where it's a flashback. So everybody's back in school in September, and they look back on their summer of the boys versus the girls at camp and all their hijinks. But what happened was they brought it to Guaraldi done with only about 2 or 3 weeks to deliver the music to get it on the air. And so you had the benefit of these guys playing together for the motion picture soundtrack and that experience and that cinematic feel, but no time. And they still churned out this great piece of music and score that you now hear here. but it was one of those things that was not done the way it was intended, and you still got this result. So I'm glad you said you liked it. You said it was cinematic, but I'm also telling you this was a rush job, and it was amazing what they were able to pull out of it. So
I just one other note on top of Jason's is when you mentioned cinematic. What I love about Vince Guaraldi is he takes a Charlie Brown theme, ba-dum, 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 bum, bum, bum. Everybody by now, 5 years after having heard it, knows this theme, right? And then he treats it cinematically, as you said. On this album, it gets its own special treatment. It's never been heard with a horn section, I don't think, before. I could be mistaken, but I don't think so. And so that's 50% of the charm of this album is taking the melodies people know and then making them big band. And the other charm is the new songs, like It Was a Short Summer, Charlie Brown, which is the title track, Masked Marvel, which he put out on Ville in 1969 on his own album. But those two tracks are very Linus and Lucy-ish, meaning that the harmonies are jazz, the melodies are accessible pop melodies. And that's why I think this stuff is great.
And speaking of Linus and Lucy, my only musical comment here will be at the end of the show, there's the big finale is Snoopy and Lucy wrist wrestling, where they're having their little arm wrestling competition. And most people, I think Bill Melendez himself felt that was one of the most fun Peanuts animation things he got to do, because there's sweat flying and there's all this action. And that's where Vince brought back Linus and Lucy in its triumphant return. It's used in a totally different way than it was used before. And throughout
the B section.
Yeah.
Ba, 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 bam. It's just the B section, hammered over and over again.
But it's so great because that was the most, obviously, it's the most famous Peanuts tune. It was used all over these specials, but every time differently. And he tried a different style or feel or whatever. And so, like Sean said, the great thing for us going through this now is fully appreciating or trying to get inside of his head to figure out how he chose things and where he would use things he already had, or use things he already had and make it anew, or use a brand new composition. And it's been very, very gratifying to go through that again. And again, we've known this from the cue sheets. We've known these songs from these shows for 55 years, in this case, 60 years in some cases. But when you hear it alone, without the effects or without the mix, it's a totally new revelation there too. And so that's half the fun of this. So.
Yeah, you're right. It's totally different. And, real quick, I want to talk about Linus and Lucy, but you mentioned Mass Marvel. When I listened to that one, how it struck me, and part of this may be, again, that kind of felt, cinematic kind of element. It reminded almost of like a spy song. And I thought 60s big bands were doing spy music all the time. It makes so much sense. And it's perfect that it was for Snoopy, because Sean, the last time we spoke, one of the things we talked about was this idea that I think it was like a march that Snoopy got when he was away from all the kids. And it was like so out of place, but it just worked because it was Snoopy. And again, it's like Snoopy lives in a fantasy world. Like he's treated like a person. And it's just so interesting to see how the music can come together and actually kind of match that.
Well, I can say Mass Marvel, I know, because we've been working closely with Derek Bang, who, by the way, does stellar liner notes, is extremely well-versed, the #1 historian on Guaraldi, and we're happy to be affiliated with him on these albums now going forward. He did the liner notes for Charlie Brown Christmas, and It's a Great Pumpkin. His favorite song, I think he would admit, or at least of the ones that are lesser known, is Mass Marvel. And you know what I hear from it, Chris, is it sounds like Pretty Woman. The bass line, not Pretty Woman. Yeah, pretty woman walking down, and it sounds like boom, 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 boom. It has that sort of bass line to it, with mid-60s kind of a sound, and that spy sound that you're talking about. It's such a fun song. And yeah, you're right. It has that synergy or that connective musical tissue to the character. One of many alter egos, Joe Cool, you got Mass Marvel, all these different characters,
the Red Baron,
or the Pilgrim in the case of
against the Red
Baron. Yeah, the Flying Ace, the Red Baron, and so that's where the music really is fantastic. It supports these characters.
Well, and that's part of the extent that the whole in the strip, Snoopy is what Charlie Brown can't be, right? It's what Charles Schultz couldn't be but wanted to be. It's that untethered ego flying free and living in that fantasy world. And so he gets all the great music because it's all those scenes without dialogue where he's flying away. And again, that's where you hear the music because Snoopy doesn't talk. So when you see the music, it's his fantasy times 2 because it's the flight of the music. And so I think that was critically important to the animators and to Vince, that Snoopy have these great themes that he could disappear in, whether he's in France in the war or he's sneaking around trying to get away with something. And,
Well, in this episode, he's also a bus driver, which has
he
one of my
takes them to
favorite
camp.
which doesn't quite make sense, but everybody accepts the dog is driving them to summer camp. And that's one of my other, I mean, we're sort of in this alternate dimension, and he plays this amazing polyrhythmic thing right there. It's called Bus Blues, and it's so cool. It goes in and out of like 3 and 4, and there's multiple layers to it. It's nothing I've ever heard from Guaraldi before or after, so
I think people really enjoy hearing this music like this for the first time, because it's not, even when we were working on it, I was surprised, because again, I'd heard there's 6 bonus tracks we hadn't heard. They're like alternate takes or whatever. But of the fundamental soundtrack, I'd heard all of this. I'd worked on these shows and done clip shows out of this. I worked on this for my whole life. There were things I'd never heard before. Even though I had heard it, I didn't appreciate, I couldn't grok it and really take it in. And I'm so grateful that Sean would be like, this is really good. Because when we first got it, we still didn't know what it was. We knew what we were looking for, but we had no idea we could make albums out of this, because it wasn't ever done. And Sean's like, no, you got to listen to that. You got to listen to This Love Will Come. This is something else. And I go, well, that's on the other show, right? He goes, it's not like this. I go, what? And it's not that it's buried in the show, but it's serving a different purpose inside the special than it can on its own as a musical recording. So
that's right. So Love Will Come is featured in the campfire scene, I think, and there's just a lot of talking, and so you don't get to hear as much of it. In fact, when I think I first listened or first watched the TV special, and it didn't even occur to me that it was a bossa, and until I then listened to the music, and I was like, oh wow, there's a lot here.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? The trick of the brain, right? Because you're so focused on what you're seeing and hearing in the dialogue that you aren't able to sort of appreciate that he's better than, I would say, run-of-the-mill background animated music, definitely at that time, And when you get to sit there, and again, I remember at the beginning of Derek Bang's book about Vince Guaraldi, he mentioned somebody's got these tapes somewhere. And I don't remember that when that book came out. It came out 5 or 6 years ago, and it always stuck in the back of my mind. I was so happy because he's like, somebody's got to find this stuff. And so it's such an honor for Jason and I to have this be made available, because this was the end of his working career beyond Peanuts, meaning he wasn't able to secure another record deal after 1969, put out Almaviva, the last of his 3 Warner's albums. So we're so stoked to be able to provide music that I'm sure he would have been happy to get out in the world, even though it's, short form, 30-second thing.
I want to point out one more thing too, beyond even the music, which is that Charles Shultz was such a great, my son just played him in a living museum. That was who they picked him to be for the Living Museum of Californian Great People. And it was fun seeing my son go through that. But I always am reminded that he wrote this strip. He did 18,000 of them, where he drew it, wrote the words, created the philosophy, and he did it every day of his life until he passed in 2000. And because he was so good at that and so connected to whatever the rest of us were feeling, it allowed him to then create these TV shows with my father, Lee, and with Bill Melendez, and with Vince Guaraldi. And the 4 of them, because of the power of Charles Schultz's strip and ingenuity and philosophy, nobody bothered them. So the 4 of those men got to make these shows every year, 1, 2, or 3 every year, and they always worked. And they worked because Sparky was a genius writer, and Bill was a genius animator, and Vince was a genius composer and performer. And the 4 of them got to do whatever they wanted to do, which I don't think is really repeatable anywhere else. And for the 10 years until Vince passed, right after doing Arbor Day, they got to do whatever they wanted to do. And it was just up to the 4 of them and what they were interested in and what they thought would be fun or what they thought would be unique or interesting. And they had that autonomy that nobody else had. So you have this sort of 10-year period from 1965 to 1976 where the 4 of them got to do these little cute things for kids, but they weren't really for kids. They're for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So this release is similar to Thanksgiving in that there are, there's a number of sort of more Q kind of format pieces, and then there's some longer format stuff as well. And so, I know that so you mentioned Linus and Lucy, and actually, Sean, we had maybe a similar discussion I think last time where we were talking about this idea that some of these tracks evolve. with each special. And but this is interesting because not only is there the primary Linus and Lucy, there's the reprise, and then there's also alternate takes. And I gotta say, I like the alternate take. So I think it's like track 27 because it's towards the end. It has these like punchy trombone lines right up front. So I guess like I think Rossellino comes in maybe the second bar after Guaraldi starts out with that iconic opening. And then the other horns are kind of layered throughout. But I was like, man, this is punchy. There's like a soul flair to it. Even in the reprise versions, I thought like it was just is very interesting. So that, you know, when folks see, oh, there's 3 or 4 of the same thing, it's like they're not. And a lot of the a lot of the fun, I think, with these types of releases is being able to hear that creative process and hear these different versions that they were coming up with.
Precisely. And I remember I think when I first saw your channel was you were reviewing the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brenner, or maybe you had it in your possession. And there's a bonus track on there which has the vibraphone or xylophone, the Celesta or Celesta, I don't know how to pronounce it. And that wasn't used in the show. And it is fascinating when Jason and I find the unused takes. You have to, and we talk with the various producers we've worked with, mixing engineers. What made them decide to use this and not that? And what value does it have not using this instrumentation here? And it's so exciting, like you said, to hear what could have been and what was different. It's not bad. It's not good necessarily. I mean, it's not worse or better. It's just a different take. And it's like, oh, maybe it served the scene better for that particular special. Maybe there was a length issue and that's why something beautiful got cut. But each one of these things we release successively, there's some that have even more and more versions and alternate takes and totally different arrangements. And it's exciting.
So, so this is coming out, as we mentioned, this is coming out on Record Store Day, and this is your first, RSD experience, right? Have you ever attended a Record Store Day, and are you going this year?
I plan on going this year. I've actually befriended my local record store where I live in San Jose, California, which I'll give a shout out to, Rasputin Records on Bascom Avenue.
Oh, I've ordered
and
from
that's where. Yeah, and I actually went in there to ask them because, as I've told you, Chris, we're new to this game of vinyl, which is obviously hot commodities for people who are audiophiles and who just love music. And we've been looking into various ways to produce these albums, manufacture them, and talking about climate sensibility and things like that. And it's just an ongoing. I like the ongoing discussion about what people are interested in vinyl, and so I hope to be there on Record Store Day this year and every time going forward. We did Thanksgiving on Record Store Essentials, which was one of our first learning curves. There's Record Store Essentials, and then there's Record Store Day. So we've already learned like there's this varieties of ways we can connect with the RSD.
I'm excited to see how it works. We'll find out. I do know it's April 20th. There's only 1,200 copies. I have a feeling they're going to be gone very quickly. I think they don't, there's no pre-orders, right? Yeah. So you got to run to the store the day of to get the thing. I'm interested to see how that works.
Camp Green. It's Camp Green, special color. These are things we're also.
Should I show it? You want to see what it looks like? All right. Hold on. So here's the album. Here's the, okay. I don't know how to do this properly. Here is the record in Camp Green. Ooh. Is it right side up? It's probably upside down. Here are the liner notes. This is the title card from the show itself. And then all the notes from Sean and Derek inside, and some art from the boxes of where we found the stuff.
There's the Mass Marvel doing the Lucy.
Yeah, that's the scene I was describing from the end of the show. So, and again, I'm sure it will do great. And we'll see how it plays in the Record Store Day context. I think, we haven't done it before. So you tell us, what should we know going into Record Store Day? What do we need to know about Record Store Day?
So this is what you have to know about Record Store Day, is that depending on the store and their reputation, so certainly Amoeba, Rasputin for sure, people are going to line up, and some people line up the night before and they camp there. And it's a big thing. And, people do this for a variety of reasons, right? I mean, one of them is because they simply want to be able to have some of these releases that are so limited. And unfortunately, the other side of it is that some people feel like, it's more of an investment. That's their kind of approach with with it and something that's scarce, and so they kind of want to they want to grab a copy. But it's always a lot of fun. It's all about supporting local record stores, right? Which a lot of us who buy vinyl all the time do anyway. But guess what? Record Store Day brings a lot of people out who don't who don't regularly buy vinyl, and I think the adage is something. It's something like I forget the percent of people who buy Taylor Swift albums that don't own record players. But there's an element of like people feel connected to the music by being able to purchase something that's tangible and physical. And so one of the things that's cool, I think, and why I think that you're not going to have a problem, or that everybody's going to have a problem finding a copy after Record Store Day, is because it's the imagery, right? It's the cover of it. Everybody's going to recognize it. It's great that it's green because, again, it's about the sort of the tangible nature of it. And out of any other release that's going to be out there for Record Store Day, the one that everybody's going to recognize because they know who's on the cover is this one. That's just how it is.
Maybe my teenage girls will camp out because my daughter has both the Taylor Swift vinyls and obviously a record player, so she's got both things going for her.
So let me ask you this, because I know that this is exclusive for Record Store Day. Is there a plan to have this available otherwise, either on vinyl, digital, CD? Like, what's the deal there?
We hope to have it available in other formats later in the year, but for right now, we're sticking to the exclusive fancy green 45 RPM.
It's the only fancy green that will ever be available.
And there's no vocals on this; it's just instrumentals, but it is it's cool. And again, it tells we can take credit for this. I'll give Sean credit for this. Sean knew this all along. Part of it for me was, how do you arrange the record, right? And the default position was put it in the order of the takes from the show, like we did for Thanksgiving, like we did for Great Pumpkin. And so that was obvious, but then in going through it, I'm like, well, wait, this is 30 seconds and it didn't. But the reality is the order that it is in the show is telling a story even without the story from the show. So it completely works. So again, I'll give Sean all the credit for being a genius about how to put this together. But the reality is Vince Guaraldi's genius of how to make these songs tell the story underneath the characters in the show worked. It was the best way to do it. There was no other way to arrange these that would have made the music flow together better. And so I think that will come through. And then just like we did with Thanksgiving, you got those bonus tracks, which gives you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, or maybe people will like it better. But again, Vince and Bill and Lee picked the songs they picked for the show, and that worked for them. And there could be a good excuse for that. I don't want to.
I mean, just think about the fact that they spent 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks getting this in online. They might not even have time to spend time thinking about which one do we choose. They might have just taken, who knows, right?
Well, I think they also hit, as I said, 69 was their most prolific year. They were firing on all cylinders. Yeah. Everybody knew what their job was and how to do it. And even though this one got delayed, there's still a level of, and I think, again, like Sean said, John Scott Trotter kept everybody in line. He kept the jazz guys on time and made them do the cues correctly. It still it was a well-oiled machine by this point. And so you can see, and like you point out, there's all these other guys on the record all of a sudden, right? Sean, is this the biggest band to date?
Yes.
It must be, right?
It is the biggest band.
You've got all these musicians, but they hit it and killed it.
Yeah, and these guys were used to executing, right? Because mixture of big band. There's a bunch of these guys are in like the Tonight Show together at some point. They were doing like Hollywood studio work.
Well, and there's another dividing line there. This is the last one from the 60s, and I think this is the last one, or the second to last one that was done in L.A.
Also, so the last mono one.
The last mono from L.A. So Vince went down to L.A. he did Christmas in 5 different sessions all over the place, but then for All Stars, Great Pumpkin, You're in Love, He's Your Dog, It Was a Short Summer, and I'm forgetting one in there. They did all of those in Los Angeles. And so there was that feeling. I think this is the last one of those that's mono from that period. Then he did the next balance after one more down there, and then the rest he did in San Francisco.
Yeah, and on that note, though, these guys, and it's mentioned in the Derek Bangs liner notes on this album, is that there are so many Bay Area connections, and he did the rest of his life in the Bay Area. He didn't tour the world. He stayed in the Bay Area in the 70s And so even though they were doing a lot of these recordings in LA, there's very much it's very much steeped in the Bay Area, and then obviously he brought the recording sessions there, like Jason said, in the '70s.
It is interesting. I've been thinking about this in the past, even about Guaraldi's career and the fact that he wasn't nearly as prolific on albums, and obviously spent a lot of time over the years on these Peanut specials. But there's got to be a the beauty part is something, Jason, I think you said that he was able to exercise creativity every single time he did it in a way that if he was at the mercy of a record label, they probably wouldn't let him. Not every musician got to just do whatever they wanted to do. These albums had to sell. And in this context, he was able to, flex a lot in a lot of different ways with a lot of different musicians, doing all different kinds of music. So it's pretty cool.
I just want to thank all the people that made this happen. The guy who mastered it, he mastered all of the albums that Jason and I have worked on. Vincent Hudson, Derek Bang, as I mentioned, is the great historian, did the liner notes, and all the people that helped us as well. I'm thrilled that we're doing this. I think Jason and I are planning on doing this a couple times a year, and it's going to be a fun thing for the fans to experience right along with us.
And I said it before, but I'm very proud that, we still are working with Bill Melendez Productions and Peanuts Worldwide and Charles Shultz Creative Associates. It's been 60 years that our families and our companies have done these things together. And I just think what's so great is we wouldn't have been able to do this if we didn't have that long-standing tradition and relationship. And the fact that we are still finding things from that long ago for the first time, and it's not a rehash, it's the first time, is a pretty spectacular legacy to be a part of. And so I want to thank all of them as well. And again, all the musicians on this have passed. We've been lucky enough with some of the other later albums, or just it's not a necessarily later albums, but to talk to a lot of these gentlemen we've known at various points in our lives going back for forever. But to be able to play this music for them when we found it and go, hey, this was you when you were 24 in this studio, and you remember doing this? And they sometimes do and sometimes they don't. But to see their expression and see, oh, that's when I used that instrument. Oh, that's when I did that. That has been an incredibly rewarding thing that I didn't think would happen at this point in my life. I'm a television producer by trade. And so it's really fun to see that. And again, one of the greatest kicks I ever got working with my father was when we go into the studio and lay down the soundtrack for a special TV show, a movie, whatever it was. And to get to find these, like Sean said, these treasures we discovered, it's been really fun in every facet to play those for the people that worked on them, and then the people that love them and have never heard them, and then for the whole new audience in the 21st century. So
I just want to say one last thing, which is that they're like time capsules. And when we talk about finding these treasures, these specials, I think we realized as we were collecting the data, as it were, as collecting the music, they all represent the years that they're from. And so these, like this 10 years, 1965 or 11 years, 1976, you very much, Guaraldi taps into what the zeitgeist has, what's available to him to play with, the sounds, and what his own natural jazz sensibilities were. And he compromised them perfectly in a way that showcased variation from one special to the next. It was enough to go, hey, that's 1973, that's 1976, that's 1965. And it's just such unearthing it like a time capsule has been fantastic.
And it's children's music, but it's not children's music. It's for everybody.
Yeah.
And there aren't so many things that work that way, and it hits the jazz feel and a little bit of the pop feel, or the spy feel, as you put it, or the cinematic feel. Yeah. All of those pieces are there. And I think it makes it timeless. I mean, obviously it's become timeless. So, I hope you enjoy this. I hope your audience enjoys this. Maybe they won't, because you can't get it if people are camping out at record stores on the 20th. I don't know what's going to happen.
Camp
but
Green.
I do think it is
Camp Green.
Well, and again, and as I said, there will be. We hope to release more things later in the year, both from this and from other things, and hopefully you'll have us back. We can talk about those things too, because we're thrilled to, anytime anyone wants to talk about this, I'm happy to talk about it. We love it.
That would be great. Yeah, I'm always excited for these album releases. I've picked up each one thus far, and I know I'm going to continue to as you guys, dust off the content from some of these other specials going forward. So I guess, in closing, for those interested in grabbing a copy, obviously visit your local record store that participates in Record Store Day.
April 20th.
And if it's been a while since you've seen the TV special, you can check out It Was a Short Summer, Charlie Brown on Apple TV Plus. So thanks very much for taking the time to chat, and certainly thanks everyone else for watching.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate it.